Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon on embedding sustainability, navigating challenges, and driving meaningful change in organizations. I'll let folks roll in. We're really delighted to have you today on behalf of the Oxford Saïd Business School, the Oxford Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, and Oxford Net Zero. And we're here today to have some of our fabulous alumni from the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme, which is a unique collaboration between two departments of the University of Oxford, to talk about their experiences on the programme and to have a conversation about embedding sustainability into their organisations. My name is Alexis McGiven, and I'm the Head of Stakeholder Engagement at Oxford Net Zero and a Research Fellow at the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment. And I'm also one of the Programme Directors on the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme. So just to start us off, to give a bit of context of where we are with embedding sustainability strategically within organizations, we're facing I don't know if the word unprecedented is a bit overused, but it's quite unprecedented times in terms of environmental changes in climate change and also the impacts of ecosystem destruction. But we're also facing changes in the regulatory landscape, in the political landscape, and even in the cultural landscape when it comes to embedding sustainability within a business and also within country level commitments. We are, of course, trying to move towards the goals embedded in the Paris Agreement of not breaching our temperature limits of 2 degrees of global warming and aiming for 1.5 degrees. But we're also increasingly governed by a series of regulatory frameworks or policy frameworks, including disclosure and public procurement guidance on how to make sure that we're aligning public spending with climate goals. And so while we see lots of headlines about the changing nature of sustainability, even just this morning, where the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, spoke about how they are going to roll back their commitment to net zero by 2050, or of course, President Trump's many and very infamous rollbacks on the landscape for climate commitments in one of the largest polluters in the world. We are also seeing a massive traction and growing traction of the clean energy transition. We're seeing renewables plummet in price. We're also seeing many publicly listed companies commit to net zero, so much so that around 80% of global GDP is covered under some form of a net zero target. So with me today is an incredible panel of people who have taken part in the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme to really understand how to more meaningfully embed sustainability within their organizations. So we can flick to the next slide, please. The next one, please. So I'm delighted to be joined by Asim Hamid, who's the Group Director of Sustainability and ESG at the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Sarah Jane Dunton, who is the Director in Operational Risk and the Environment at Travers Smith in the UK. Jeremy Osborne, who's the Global Head of Sustainability at ICPA and CIMA, which are the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants and the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. And Richard Bonner, who's the UK and Innovation Buildings and Places Market Director at Atkins Realis, UK. And just to also introduce my colleague, if we can go to the next slide, please. Christine Homoki, who will be speaking to us about the programme just at the end, who is a senior programme consultant in executive education at the Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. So as I mentioned, all of these wonderful panelists, we could maybe flick back one slide, are alumni of the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme, which is really trying to take a 3-pillar approach to understanding how to embed a net zero or sustainability target, both really embedding us in the science of climate change and net zero through some of the leading experts in the Oxford Net Zero Research Group, who have been doing some of the seminal research on climate change for well over 30 years here. In the standards, so understanding the regulatory landscape and the standards landscape, and in the strategies, so building on the amazing and world recognized research from the Saïd Business School and their experience with practitioners on embedding strategy. So without further ado, I'll hand over to each of my panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their work, starting with Asim.
Thank you, Alexei. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Asim Hamid Khan, and I'm the Group Director of Sustainability and ESG for a holding group which is mainly focusing on construction, real estate, and infrastructure, and funded by the region's largest wealth fund. When I say region, I'm from Saudi Arabia, so this is public investment fund. I'm now with 25 years of experience in large-scale transformation, real estate, infrastructure, and ESG strategies across Middle East, mainly KSA and UAE. And I'm fortunate I've witnessed that firsthand evolving sustainability landscape, you can say. I know, I mean, often viewed through the lens of oil production, UAE and Saudi Arabia specifically, they are undergoing a rapid transformation, but placing sustainability at the core of economic growth or diversification. And honestly, a shift that is frequently overlooked. The Vision 2030 of Saudi Arabia has set an ambitious path, but the challenge remains, how do we balance that sustainability with the economic viability? And this Oxford Sustainability Program, it provided me with the tools to tackle this challenge head-on, equipping me with the world best practice, data-driven methodologies, and I would say leadership strategies to drive real impact.
Thank you so much, Asim. Maybe Jeremy, could you go next, please?
Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy Osborne. I'm the Global Head of Sustainability, as Alexis said, at AICPA and CIMA. Well done, Alexis, for understanding what our acronyms mean. We are the world's largest accountancy institute. And my role we call ourselves the association, is really to support capacity building amongst the global accountancy professions. So primarily through our members, but not exclusively so. Our members work in public practice, so they work for audit firms, providing audit services, advisory services, and sustainability assurance services, but they also work in business and industry. That's on the CIMA side. So they are preparing the information that ultimately is disclosed publicly to the capital markets and to other stakeholders. I've worked with CFOs and their teams in this area for quite a long time now. And I've always had the view that there is quite an urgent need to deepen the skills of accountants, or deepen the knowledge base of accountants in the context of sustainable business. I heard this rather nicely put recently when somebody said that accountants have the skills, but they may not have the knowledge. And all of the world's large professional accountancy institutes have a responsibility there to support their members with that. So part of what I do in my day job is I manage and lead the relationship we have with Side Business School. And we have an existing joint program with them that is aiming to do exactly what it says on the tin, which is to deepen those skills and knowledge base for accountants in the context of running and managing sustainable businesses. In a personal capacity, I serve on the UK Sustainability Disclosure Technical Advisory Committee, another mouthful, but the UK Sustainability TAC is advising the UK government on endorsement of IFRS S1 and S2. So these are the world's, they're the global baseline for sustainability disclosure standards. And we are expecting the UK government to issue the exposure draft of the UK Sustainability Disclosure Standards shortly. So that will be another major step forward in the context of decision useful, high quality information, primarily for the capital markets to support decision making. So that's me, and pass back to Alexis.
Thanks so much. Sarah Jane.
Thanks, Alexis. It's really nice to be here. So I'm Sarah Jane Denton. I'm a director in the Operational Risk and Environment Group at Travers Smith, which is a law firm in London in the UK. I have 20 plus years of experience in advising people on environmental matters, and more recently, as the growth of ESG and sustainability has happened across the globe in substantive underlying environmental, social, and governance matters that now form part of that universe that we're all quite familiar with. Travis Smith has quite a wide client base, including corporates, but also a large number of financial institutions, and also clients like who face their own challenges in terms of sustainability. So I'm here as a participant, an alumni of the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme, but actually it's a very large part of my job also to be advising people on and clients on sustainability matters. So my purpose really in attending the course was twofold. So hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss that in a bit more detail.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah Jane. And last but not least, Richard, who is the UK and Ireland lead, not UK and innovation. I see that my mind goes to innovation.
Don't worry. That's just a little detail. So welcome and thank you very much for inviting me. So I work for a company called AtkinsRéalis. We're a big global engineering services provider in the natural and built environment, but also we have a nuclear energy delivery part to our business. And our mission is about engineering a better future for the planet and its people. So sustainability and everything that it unfolds is right at the heart of our business. I think it's quite interesting because my role is advising clients around how they bring and deliver major programs, projects, whether that's in the world of regeneration or climate adaptation or transport networks or infrastructure, housing delivery, mega cities in places like Saudi Arabia. But I really wanted to join the program because whilst my organization is quite mature in its approach to its sustainability strategy, wanted to be able to make the link between how we organize as a big multinational organization and how I translate that into solutions thinking, strategic thinking for my clients and with my organization. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit about my action learning plan later, but I really welcome the chance to network with some fantastic colleagues on the cohort, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the great things that we discovered through our week at the business school. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And as Richard and others have said, we had an incredible cohort of about 30 people who were actually, I've forgotten the number, about 20 odd people who were part of our incredible first cohort of the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme. And it was a really exceptional week because it paired some of the academic research that's being done at Oxford with the experience of practitioners implementing these sustainability strategies sort of on the front line, many of them trying to sometimes change their organizations from within. And so we were really delighted to have them in Oxford, and we paired that week of learning with some experiential learning in Oxford. So sometimes in the Oxford Chapel and learning through, shared experiences and over the dinner at colleges. And so it was a really fantastic week, and really delighted now to share, to have these panelists share more about their experiences. So with that, I'll ask, what are the sort of biggest challenges and opportunities facing sustainable businesses at the moment? I'll open that to any of the panelists who would like to weigh in.
Yes, I can take that.
Naseem, are you going to?
Yeah. I think, the part of the world I'm from, especially Middle East, I think one of the biggest challenges in sustainable business today is that bridging the gap between the sustainability goals and business transformation. Here we set, or many organizations, they set net zero targets, but the struggle lies in execution, actually. And I passed through this struggle in terms of how do we align sustainability with financial performance, or how do we integrate ESG within the regulatory frameworks, or how do we drive the real change while managing the stakeholder expectations. So I think the program, the Oxford Sustainable Business Program, it reinforced a key insight. Sustainability is not just about compliance. It's a strategic advantage, I would say. So the biggest opportunity lies in moving beyond governance and reporting to truly embedding sustainability into the core business operations. This will be my take.
Thanks so much, Naseem. Richard, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating in terms of the geopolitical situation at the moment. So, we have a strategy that we've been developing and evolving over the last several years, which includes how we deliver our own strategic objectives in our journey to net zero. But it's quite interesting around, or what we found is quite interesting, is actually what the marketplace is doing in organizations like ours in terms of, for instance, connecting to and committing to the Science Based Target Initiative Institute's 1.5 degree plan. We're seeing some real tensions in organizations as to how they reconcile their ambitions, their shareholder value, what their clients expect of them. And it was really interesting to grapple with some of that challenge through the week with colleagues, which was interesting. And then I just find it's really interesting currently in the world of geopolitics as to what it means to develop strategies, solutions, corporate strategies, propositions for clients in a world that's quite fluid and dynamic. We might want to talk a bit more about that through this call.
I think, Richard, that's a really good point. So when we were all on the course together, it was October, and it feels like things have changed quite dramatically since then, at least in terms of the political environment, obviously with Trump becoming president in the US and the executive orders that have been signed off. The sense I have at the moment, and I don't think I would have said this in October, is that there's a lot of, particularly sustainability professionals, saying that everybody just has to stay the course and continue committing to what they had previously believed was the right thing to do, or was the right business case, or was the direction of travel that their value chain, the regulatory context, etc., was following. So I think at this point in time, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is how does one make sense of the chaos that appears to be coming out from a US political environment, allied with what we see going on, for example, in the EU. So geeks like myself, who were following the omnibus proposal. So this is essentially a proposal to row back on really the world leading EU sustainability reporting requirements, primarily through raising the threshold at which companies have to report. So in one fell swoop, if this was to be approved, would probably reduce the number of corporate reporters that are currently reporting against the European standards by about 4/5. And I think businesses are just scratching their heads going, what on earth do we make of all this? We've got a sort of very anti-ESG environment in the US. We've got the environment in the EU where there appears to be sort of stepping backwards. The UK, as I said in my preamble, we are expecting the UK government to issue the UK Sustainability Disclosure Standards possibly in March. And I think businesses are probably left thinking, what should we continue committing to? If we have to make choices, what are the absolute priorities? How much do we want to be consistent with what we have committed to previously, as Richard said, with, say, science-based targets initiatives? I mean, the number of companies reporting against that has grown exponentially. So I think it's a very, very difficult environment. I don't know, Sarah Jane, if you have a view from Travis Smith around this.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo what you were just saying. And when we were thinking about this question, I think the uncertainty, just to summarize everything you've just said, it just boils down to uncertainty. And from a regulatory perspective, obviously, uncertainty is really the enemy of business. So this change is all couched in terms of doing business a favor, but I think this uncertain environment that it leaves us with is incredibly unhelpful. We have got the EU that is flip-flopping on its already enacted requirements for companies. There's a question as to whether or not that signifies a broader rollback of the EU that has always been a really positive sustainability leader. Hopefully not. Just yesterday, the UK announced an action plan on which it was talking about essentially deregulation. Didn't use the word deregulation, but essentially that's what that boils down to. So hopefully this is not sort of a worldwide impact where people roll back on sustainability. If it is, I think that becomes all the more important that businesses work out for themselves what their sustainability ambition is, and as Jeremy says, to stay the course, just run with what you believe is right for your business, even if you haven't got that regulatory driver that sits behind it. And I think one takeaway for me from, just to bring it back to the course, I mean, so I work for a law firm. We're an office-based business. We don't have sort of huge environmental impacts as such. Yeah, we have sort of social impacts that we manage, and we take sort of regular actions to reduce our environmental footprint in terms of, energy efficiency and food waste and things like that. But I think what that can leave you with is sort of lacking a bit of a North Star in terms of sustainability ambition. It's a bit harder to get a big win. So, if you're a steel producer and you switch to green steel, everyone can see, brilliant, well done, you've sort of achieved this massive decarbonisation goal. For us, it's more sort of about what is the impact of our advice that we give to clients. So in terms of the projects that we essentially facilitate, and I think a couple of my panelists are in a similar position, what are we facilitating clients to do that could have an environmental impact? Now, on the course, of course, it's not in law firms' interests. It's against their business model to sort of be turning clients away too regularly for the work that they're doing. But I think what the course really taught me was actually how to boil the messaging down such that you actually talk to people on a level and in terms that they can understand. And I think then when we think about the geopolitics, we see exactly this dynamic emerging in the US, where people don't want to talk about ESG anymore. So they're starting to talk about resilience. And for me, that actually is quite a positive development, because it really funnels the messaging down. When we talk about sustainability, it's not about a nice to have. It is about the long-term viability of the business, the sector, the industry, and that is about your impact on the world, and it's about the world's impact on you. So for me, sort of shifting the narrative towards resilience is a good idea. And actually, I think Oxford really helped me to hone that messaging so that I could speak to senior managers in our firm along those lines.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Oh, sorry. I'll just say, if people have, just as a reminder, because Christine has just put this in the chat, if there are questions or reflections that are coming up, please put them in the Q&A box if it's a question, and we'll go to the panelists near the end of the webinar. And if you have comments, we'd love, I see a few already in the chat, so we'd love to keep hearing them. But Jeremy, over to you.
No, there's a really interesting point, Sarah Jane, that you make about resilience. I mean, this was quite noticeable when BlackRock, for example, and Larry Fink, for those who follow his sort of New Year letter over the years, they've done quite a lot to shape American corporate culture around sustainable business models. And I think it was BlackRock that started to reframe what their ambitions were in terms of transitional business models. So in a way, this was another euphemism for low carbon business models, but without mentioning climate change or carbon. We at the association, we for many years have framed sustainability in terms of long-term value creation. Now, obviously, resilience, long-term value creation, they're two sides of the same coin. You're not likely to have an unresilient business that is nonetheless still generating value over the long term. So I think what the change in language can do is to frame the underlying priorities that might otherwise be discussed as sustainability as a business issue and as a business imperative. And I think that really helps. And there's a very nice example of this in terms of the Task Force for Climate-related Financial Disclosures, which the work of which has now been absorbed into the IFRS Foundation that is setting the new global standards for sustainability, framed climate change in terms of the impact that it was having on the strategy, the governance, the risk management, and the performance and metrics of each business reporting against the framework. And I think that was a really clever piece of work that was done, because it framed climate change as a core business issue, just as any other primary risk might be to be managed. And now, as we've talked about, we think about this in the context of opportunities too. So language does matter, and I think it's actually quite helpful periodically to reframe some of these issues in a very business-like way, because in a way it deals with the naysayers and it deals with the doubters and it deals with those who say, well, I'm not a tree hugger, I don't care about such and such a sustainability issue. But hopefully, if they're working in business, they will care about resilience, they will care about long-term value creation.
That's great. Thanks so much. It's a very compelling way to explain how we're seeing those shifts. And actually, even just at a language level, I know many colleagues who are working in the US context are just taking the same project and reframing it, the exact same work, as a risk resilience or a risk mitigation measure. Which actually brings me to the next point in terms of one of the things that we wanted to design the program around is really making sure that participants are leaving the program with a sense of what happens next and not just having this really wonderful week in Oxford where they've met like-minded people and learned a lot. And so we really structured the program around both learning and creating an action plan, which was basically a template for storing some of the learnings from the week in terms of what you want your sustainability objectives to be, when sort of what the timeline of those goals will be, who you will engage, what kind of support you might need in order to do that, which could include, for example, support from the people that taught you on the Oxford Sustainable Business Programme, or the accountability measures that you're going to put in place, whether that's something as small as, when I get back, I'm going to show this to my colleague and make sure someone else other than me knows what my plan is. And we really talked about what my colleague and co-programme director, Mary Johnston-Louis, talked about as the 3 Mondays. So the first Monday back after the program, after your 5 days in Oxford, your first Monday back, what are your sort of immediate steps? It could be talking with your colleagues over lunch about what you learned, or, putting your action plan somewhere printed on your desk that you're looking at it, have a visual reminder of it. The second Monday is in 1 year's time. So thinking about what your action plan will look like after you've been through a whole year of trying to implement it. And then thinking about what your Monday will look like on this exact same date in 2050, knowing that, there's many of those goals will be implemented by then, or will need to be actioning them. In 2030, thinking about what those goals will look like in 5 years' time, and at these sort of climate inflection points, with a goal to reaching net zero by 2050. So thinking through what your activity will look like. So we had this sort of 3 Mondays framework. And with that, I'd love to hand over to some of our panelists to talk to how they develop their action plan, and how in the last few months since the program ended, they've been implementing some of the things they developed during their time in Oxford.
Yeah, I think I still remember from the very first day when we stepped into Oxford as a cohort of strangers. I think we quickly became a global network of sustainability leaders. And yes, I mean, the program was more than just theoretical. It was about practical application, real world case studies, and strategic action plans that translated the ambition into measurable business outcomes. I think one of the most important thing was the action plan. I mean, not just as an academic exercise, I would say, but a financially sound, stakeholder-driven roadmap. So I would say before the program, sustainability is a priority. And after the program, here is a very structured, financially viable plan to achieve it. And this shift in perspective was performed, and now with the plan in motion, the real work at least begins for me. I was not alone in developing this action plan. It was very well supported by the program team, and their support was invaluable and truly helped drive meaningful progress. So what I have to achieve, or what I want to achieve, we focused on that, and it really helped me. Now I have my net zero GHG emission across group operation. Do remember that I'm from a world where the topic is still quite nascent, and we are leading the decarbonization of Saudi Arabia's construction and real estate sector. And then we focused on why these outcomes are important to me personally, and why it is important to my organization. And most importantly, how this question in terms of the support you need from the executive sponsorship, who then strongly support you, especially the leadership, to prioritize your sustainability initiatives, the cross-departmental collaboration, that is very important. And during the action plan, when we were developing, we talked a lot about it. It helped me a lot. Engagement from key department, in my case, the operation, finance, human resource, and marketing to integrate that sustainability across all business functions and the external expertise. And the most important and the core of the plan and the key goals and when you have to achieve that. I think it give a lot of help, at least to me. As I've said, it's still in motion, and it will be really helpful for those who have plans of joining this program.
Thank you. Maybe I
Thanks
can
to
come.
Richard.
Yeah, well, Asim and I worked together in our project work group, actually, and so it was fascinating to see your challenges up close and the work that we were doing together to build those plans through the week. I mean, I was really interested in some of the content that related to, I suppose, the physical element of what we see. It plays quite strongly into the world that I live and work in, and I was particularly struck by some of the sessions we had around the impact on the planet, and in the UK, we're seeing some real big policy shifts towards biodiversity net gain, and what that means in terms of using nature much more as a sort of positive asset for improving quality of life, helping with our sustainability, our resiliency goals, well-being goals, and so actually my project was related to more of a sort of physical way in which we respond to the opportunities that present themselves in that world of what we call nature-based solutions. And I sort of took through the sessions the great facilitation that was available through the week, that sharing of ideas with colleagues on the cohort through the week, reflecting on some of the work that we covered in terms of policy, the policy landscape, some of the science that sits behind it, and bringing those things together and then developing that into a strategic plan. So as I came away from our week together, it galvanized me into tackling something that had been on my mind for a little while. So I've been able to bring some people together to start to move forwards in a way that's going to create business impact in the short term and give us a footing into the longer term for some really good sustainable revenue flows, in a way that my time in Oxford just helped to galvanize some of the strategic imperatives alongside the sort of some of the scientific or some of the science elements behind it. So that was great, and I just enjoyed that sense of co-learning through the week. Thank you.
So much, Richard. And Jeremy, I think you're about to come in, but just before I come to you, I just wanted to say got a couple of questions in the chat in the Q&A, which we'll come to near the end of the hour. But I just wanted to acknowledge something that's in the chat about sort of how we repivot towards the risk or resilience framing and away from sort of doing responsible climate action as part of being good caretakers of our planet and the nature that's on our planet, and good caretakers to our fellow citizens. So I think there's a real tension there, and one that we deal with a lot, which is how much of ourselves and our care for planet and people do we bring into the space, and how much do we use that as the convincing tool to bring other people along. And I guess just from a personal perspective, we have spent a lot of time trying to remind people of the innate value of climate action for protecting a livable future for many people, including those who are least responsible and most affected by climate change. But I think I'd be curious, just as a sort of side note to the panel, to maybe try to weave that into some of your action plans of how you've delivered the message back from your time at Oxford of towing that line between care and responsible business.
I'm happy to respond to that, and then I'll provide a few comments on the action plan as well. So I think it's not that one's reframing the issue, it's using language that's appropriate to the audience. As I said, I think the underlying issue is let's take say net zero transition. If the business's ambition or an organization's ambition is to transition towards net zero, There are those who will be very motivated by decarbonisation and will immediately get the link back to the role that they are playing, that their employer is playing or their business is playing in contributing towards mitigating the impacts of climate change and managing that transition. There are others who may respond better if they understand that this is about managing business risk and opportunity, or it's managing revenue or costs, which is often a very direct relationship, say to, I don't know, as Sarah Jane was talking about in the context of a professional services firm, of reducing energy overheads or improving the efficiency of buildings, etc. So I think it's a case of pitching the language to the audience. Now, I'm a management accountant by profession. I work, as I said, for the world's largest accountancy institute. Accountants are professional skeptics. That's what auditors are required to be, professionally skeptic when they conduct the audits. For any of you who work for publicly listed companies, and so there is a bit of a mindset of skepticism and perhaps of cynicism at times, and that's fine because it provides challenge. And so sometimes for that audience, one might want to think about sustainability in terms of, as Sarah Jane was saying, resilience, as we would put it, long-term value creation, as Larry Fink has put it, of transitional business models. They're still dealing with the same issues and they're still dealing with those issues head on, but they're just finding a way to engage with the audience to bring them on side. And as somebody who I've worked in this area for the best part of 17 years, and I have had a lot of first-hand experience of how important it is to pitch that message to the audience, to bring them on board and not to alienate them. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced than perhaps we were suggesting. But just to bring it back to the action plan. So one of the things that I really liked about the action plan was that we discussed it within our groups, and then a handful of people also presented back to the wider group of 24 or so business executives on the program. And that was really good. And for me, actually, was the most nerve-wracking part of the week, because one, in a conceited way, can imagine that one's plans are absolutely brilliant. But where it starts getting nerve-wracking is when you have a incisive and intelligent group of peers who are prepared to pick it apart. So that was a really valuable exercise to go through, and to have that peer feedback as part and parcel of the build-up to that. And I really like the idea of having something tangible to take back to your business after a course, because one can get carried away with the enthusiasm, the energy of a course, and this was a very intense course, and that generated its own energy, which I really liked. And that energy might carry you through to maybe midweek of the following week, possibly the end of the next week. But actually, to have that sort of a date in the diary, in a way of, right, what are you going to do the Monday that you're back? How are you going to review progress a Monday, a month down the line, a year down the line? I'm glad you corrected yourself, Alexis. I was getting a bit worried about 2050. I don't remember making any plans, and that is quite a long way away, although it's an important date in terms of a lot of national net zero policy commitments. But 2030, again, 5 years outlook, that's kind of in line probably with a lot of strategic plans, if they're sort of 3 to 5 year outlook. So I think that's a really good way of framing it. And that really helps focus all of our minds, I think, from some of the conceptual stuff that we've been dealing with to something that is of practical benefit to our own organizations.
Yeah, I'll just round that off. My take on the action plan, I think it's probably important to say, because I think we understand this, but you might not necessarily coming to this fresh, is that the action plan was about sort of setting goals, but it's not in the very traditional sense of, I'm going to set a net zero goal for my organization for 2030. The goals were actually really varied in terms of what each person felt was a realistic but ambitious goal for their own organization, which I think sort of drives home the many and varied nature of sustainability in general. And then the sort of the 3 Mondays really helped us to make sure that actually it wasn't just a goal that you set and you sort of pinned it on the wall and got up in the morning and looked at it, but actually you had some sense of how you were going to get there. And I know from my advisory work that one of the least convincing ways to set a goal is just to sort of set a long-term goal and have literally zero idea how you're going to get there. So for me, that was really compelling that there were these concrete steps. I would sort of slightly counter what Jeremy said about us picking holes in each other's plans, because actually I found the encouragement and the inspiration and sort of very constructive feedback that we gave each other one of the most helpful aspects. And that was both in the small groups where throughout the week we were developing the plan, but also I also presented my plan at the end, and some of the contributions that we all sort of stuck on post-it notes and gave to each other at the end was incredibly helpful to me. And you know, sometimes in terms of ambition versus realism, I think that is another area where we had lots of sort of training on that aspect during the week, which was incredibly helpful to shape our own plans, because sometimes you can't just sort of sit down and go, right, net zero 2030, here we come. Sometimes it's just about sort of putting this issue on the agenda of key decision makers in your organization, about sort of getting the conversation started, rather than sort of, you know, coming back on the Monday and banging the table like we probably all wanted to, because we were so revved up after the program. But I, in common with some others on the course, actually had to admit that actually I'm a relatively small cog in a really big organization. So I sort of questioned my own agency in terms of my ability to make that change. But again, the way that the action plan helped us to work out, well, actually, but what can I do? What can I as an individual contribute? I found that really helpful. And, you know, in a big organization, you know, a law firm is a partnership where people make decisions by consensus, right? So there's a lot of people that you need to bring along on that journey. And again, that sort of how you frame the narrative, put it in terms that they understand and can relate to in terms of long-term financial resilience, was very helpful for me.
Thanks so much all for your wonderful reflections on the action plan and seeing how that was implemented in practice. Just with a view to having enough time for the lovely questions that are coming into the chat, I wonder if we could have some brief reflections on our final question, which is, you know, we have some questions and comments in the chat about details of the program, about the class profile. If I'm looking at the website and hearing from you guys and thinking, maybe I should apply to the Oxford Sustainable Business Program, which is running again September 15th to 19th this year, why should someone invest the time and the money in professional training of this nature? I'd love to hear from each of you on that.
Yeah. I think if you are considering this program, I mean, the real question is whether it's isn't worth the investment. It's whether you really want to take your sustainability leadership to the next level. I think this is one should think about. I mean, in my own experience, the return on investment from the program beyond expectation. If you talk about leadership growth, it was transformational for me. Networking and long-term impact, it was unparalleled. So the insights which we gained here don't stay in theory only. They become real-world strategies driving measurable change. So if you want to turn sustainability ambition into action, I think the program is for you.
I think, if I can, Alexis, to build on that, I think for me it was probably a very similar set of outcomes. I had the privilege of spending a week at the business school earlier on in the year with my company on a specific leadership program, and what I really liked and welcomed about the opportunity to join the Sustainable Business cohort was actually taking some of my developed leadership skills into a world that I was a little less familiar with, which was the world of sustainability, and that ability to try and rationalize what we have as a corporate strategy and what's in front of me with my clients and my responsibilities to the communities where, you know, our people live and work, and indeed to try and reconcile the demands that our shareholders put on us as well. So I really welcomed the time to just learn a bit more about the science, the strategy, the standards, and how I could then apply that very much into the needs that I have in my role in the business.
I think I would. Oh, sorry, Richard.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I was banding
I
back.
would completely concur with what Richard and Asim have said. I think the course is very intense, but having a week of very concentrated learning, experiences, networking, etc., is actually really good fun, and it's energizing. It's sort of I certainly felt like it was a bit like being a student again, which was good, but with a very clear focus with what we were doing. I think in a very short period of time, so in 4.5 days, I think we had a really good overview of starting with the science of climate change, and then over the course of the week, we covered areas such as the economics of net zero transition. We looked at the implications from an ethical perspective on developing economies. We covered a whole suite of different areas. So it's a really good way in a very intense short period of time to develop a good knowledge base around that. And as I said, from an accountancy perspective, if accountants have the skills but they may not have the knowledge, then this is a great course to boost the knowledge. And I think I would concur particularly with what Richard said about the time for reflection. Sometimes it's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to have a whole week out from not on holiday, but on a business working week from the day-to-day of the business, and just having a week of reflecting on what is one trying to achieve through one's job, and where are the challenges, where are the opportunities surrounding that, and how can one sort of accelerate and turbocharge what one's trying to do anyway in terms of sustainable business models. So that was really helpful to have that week and to do it with a fantastic peer group from all over the world. It really was really excellent networking in a way that is on a different level of quality from the networking one might do at a half day or a day long or even a 2-day conference, because as I said, it kind of felt a bit like being a student. You're kind of living and breathing the same air together and eating the same food for a week, and that was just very welcome. So I think it was a fantastic experience, and it is an investment of time. It's an investment of cash, and I certainly thought long and hard about it. I was encouraged to do the course by the leadership at the association. I'm very glad I had the opportunity to do it.
That doesn't leave me too much to say. I agree entirely with everything that's been said before. I think particularly, Jeremy, to echo your comments around sort of the motivation of it, I definitely came away really energized and committed to doing what small things I could within the grand scheme of things to actually bring about change, which I think is important for all of us to realize that we all have got that role. I think I'm a sustainability advisor, so I think it's worth saying that I learned something from every single session during the week, and there were others sort of in similar positions to me. And it would be completely wrong for anybody that's listening to this to assume that they know everything and don't need to go on this course. It was so comprehensive in terms of the skills and the information that it gave us around the challenges of improving sustainability and building a sustainable business, from the management to the, as Jeremy said, the economics, the science. It was very full in that sense. It was a very rounded picture of what it means to actually help businesses to become more sustainable. So yeah, I don't think you should hesitate if you are asking yourself that question.
And as others have mentioned, it was also just great fun. We had a lot of really great conversations, made some great friends. So I'm just conscious of time, and I think we'll not have time to get to every question, but I'll just bring in Mohammed's question, which is about balancing short-term and long-term goals. So he says, working in a corporate world where financial gains in the short term is more valuable than the long term, how do you change the direction or have bottom-up change when the executives are keen for short-term goals? Welcome any reflections on that.
Maybe I can start with that. I mean, it's interesting. We had town hall for senior execs with our global CEO yesterday, actually, and absolutely making the point we're creating a long-term sustainable business. we're creating long-term value for our shareholders and, you know, and the communities. We want to create real impact where we conduct our business. But there is an imperative on, you know, many organizations actually having that year-on-year performance. That is just a dilemma that I think we need to resolve. But my sense is that most organizations want to create long-term sustainable business models. It just has to be interwoven with the shorter term imperatives around driving, you know, expected performance goals. But that's what we have to do as a leader, is to balance those two things. So I don't think it's either one or the other. It's how you create that balance. And again, you know, some of the sessions, the reflection sessions we had together through the week, I think helped me to understand that we're often working in dilemma resolution in many of the decisions that we need to make as business leaders.
I would agree, Richard, with what you say. These are not incompatible. Every business has to try and balance the short-term financial performance. At the very least, it needs to be profitable, it needs to have a healthy balance sheet, and it needs to have a positive cash flow, because without those three things, you can't do anything else. But equally, I think the whole sustainability movement is about, as we've discussed, long-term resilience, long-term value creation, long-term management of risks and opportunities, etc., however you want to phrase it. And that, I think, is where the opportunity lies, is in communicating and explaining and talking with business executives around the role that sustainability can play in all of this. So again, if we just take the example of carbon, the short-term benefits from decarbonising a business model will probably translate into lower overheads because energy costs will reduce. And that will have an immediate impact on both cash flow and the health of the P&L. In the medium term, it might be about the resilience of the business to the impacts from climate change. And I think, you know, there'll be many people, I should imagine, on the call today who have had first-hand experience of this. So even if one thinks about, you know, the wildfires in California a few weeks back, there's so many unprecedented weather events which have been going on. So the medium term, in preparing or anticipating for a possible event in the future, that will strengthen the health of the balance sheet. And in the long term, it's about creating as I intimated at the beginning, a sustainable business model that can generate value over time. And I think that's where, particularly from a finance and accounting profession perspective, things get really interesting, because for most businesses, not all businesses, but for most businesses, the vast majority of their market value actually is represented by their intangibles, and intangibles are the least well managed part from a sort of technical financial accounting perspective of how those are understood, how they're accounted for, etc. Probably any bits that a business is managing. And intangibles and sustainability are one level one and the same. It's managing your human capital, managing your social and relationship capital, managing your impacts and dependencies on natural capital, etc. So things that don't necessarily translate into the P&L or the balance sheet. They may for technical reasons, but the vast majority of that value actually is unaccounted for. And that's the long-term value creation. And that's where management of sustainability, impacts, risks, opportunities, dependencies, however one wants to frame them, is about the long-term value creation potential of the business. So I think one has to manage sustainability within those three timeframes: the short term, the medium term, and the long term. And it's not a case that they're mutually incompatible or exclusive.
Thanks so much, Jeremy and Richard, for your reflections. So just with a view of passing off to my colleague Christine to talk about the programme, and maybe we'll have Asim and Sarah Jane come on this one. And this is from Jose Hong. He says, understanding that you're in large organisations, what has been the hardest thing you faced in implementing your action plans, and how have you overcome this challenge? And if I could ask you for brevity, so I have time to hand over to Christine. Thank you.
I would just say that I think it's the need to have a bit of patience. So yes, we did all come away from the week really sort of revved up and ready to make an immediate change. But the reality is that large organizations don't necessarily change really quickly. But to have that sort of the impetus to sort of keep pushing and keep doing what you can to persuade business leaders and to convince them of the value in all the ways that you've just talked about, And yeah, I think for me, maybe that's a personal characteristic, but patience has been a challenge.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. And finally, over to you, Asim.
Yes, I think it's in the region where I am. I think ESG in the context of Saudi Arabia, it's pragmatism over hype. So Saudi Arabia is approaching ESG. It's aligned with the global shift, by the way. The kingdom isn't abandoning sustainability or ESG, but is redefining, as my colleague said, to fit the national priorities, moving away from the performative compliance towards practical impact-driven sustainability. And they are setting its own ESG path, which is pragmatic, strategic, and impact-driven. And the question isn't that, what's happening globally or ESG will survive, but how it will evolve to serve real economic and environmental goals.
Thank you so much, Asim, and thank you, Jeremy, Richard, and Sarah Jane for your reflections. It's such a pleasure to have you all here with me today and to remind ourselves of such a great time that we had in October. So with that, I'll thank you all for your time and thank you everyone who tuned in, and apologies for those whose questions we couldn't answer. But I'll hand over to my colleague Christine, who will speak a little bit more about the programme dates this year. And I see she's already put in the chat that you can book a consultation call with her or reach out to her on LinkedIn. So I'll pass over to Christine to close us off.
Thank you for that, Alexis, and thank you so much for our amazing panel. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation today, and thank you so much for your questions and for adding to the chat. I don't have much to add because our brilliant panels already talked about our program and mentioned how it helped them. Our program is a collaboration between three amazing institutions in the University of Oxford. Oxford Said Business School brings in the innovation in strategy, and the Smith School brings in their expertise in climate science. And of course, Net Zero brings in the frameworks and the tools. So all these three institutions are the best way that you can really learn about the science of climate change and how you could really bring that into your business and operationalize that. So I have a few QR codes, 3 QR codes on the chat. This will allow you to book a call, apply to the program, or learn more about the program. I am the senior consultant of the program, and I'm supported by my colleague Tanil, and we can both answer any questions you may have and contact us to see if this program is the right fit for you and how it can serve your organization. So our next iteration is scheduled for the 15th and the 19th of September, and we are already receiving a lot of applications at the moment, and I hope that you also consider applying. We look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.